most people think racing is about taking chances and being risky. And it's absolutely the opposite. There is so much safety that goes into those cars. And, as I mentioned, drifting around, 120 miles an hour, you don't just go out there and see if you can do 120 miles an hour around a corner. You creep up on that every lap after lap, and you get better and better and better. And all of a sudden you hear the wheel squealing. It's like, oh, that's fine. I know where I'm at. I'm not at the limit yet. Yeah. So, everything's calculated. Racing is like a chess match at speed. You get past, now you got to calculate where's the next place I can repass.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Going Beyond the Deal podcast. Today's conversation is with Gary Kellstrom Jr., founder and CEO of Geared Power Biotech, a Wayne, New Jersey-based medical device startup developing BioGuard UVC. BioGuard UVC is a wearable pathogen inactivation device designed to stop airborne pathogens at the source by using enclosed germicidal UVC light chambers. Most people think about respiratory infections through the lens of masks and air filters or air purification. Gary's thinking about it differently. Instead of trying to filter what everyone else is breathing in, his technology focuses on inactivating pathogens in the exhaled breath of infected people before those pathogens reach the surrounding environment. Gary is a mechanical engineer, a Stevens Institute of Technology graduate, a serial entrepreneur with a previous exit, and someone who spent 17 years inside the medical device industry before building this company. He has patents, FDA momentum, congressional support, and major industry recognition. But like a lot of founders building something meaningful, he's still in the hard middle. Pre-revenue, pre-clearance, raising capital, and pushing forward while the timeline is not fully in his control. Today, we're going to talk about the company, the FDA process, the capital raise, the founder journey, and the human being behind all of it. Gary, thank you for being here. Let's go beyond the deal. How are you today, my friend?
Thank you, Michael. It's wonderful being here. Thanks for having me.
I hope that introduction as deserves as it should be.
Beyond. It was I'm beside myself listening to all of that. I'm just trying to get something done here, and you make it really sound wonderful.
I love it. Well, listen, everybody, Gary was a 2026 EY Entrepreneur of the Year finalist. So we have to give you a little bit of congratulations.
Thank you very much.
I was rooting for you from the sidelines, as they say. But we'll get into that a little bit later. You spent 17 years inside the medical device industry before founding Geared Power. What did those you can't boil it down to like one lesson, but what did those 17 years really teach you ahead of this?
Well, I tell you what, the biggest thing that BD did for me, was they redeemed my faith in business humanity. I got to BD. Yeah, BD is a wonderful company, and I hope it's okay. I'm using their name. I hope it's okay with them. I have nothing but good things to say. And I had just come off of a patent infringement case. Somebody had infringed on our patent, so I wound up starting at BD, and that was a chapter change in my life. The people there were wonderful. I had never had easy projects. Everything was a challenge, but that's what I was hired for, and that's what I love doing. The growth never stops. You're always learning. And my role kind of evolved, but I was a Six Sigma black belt. I did continuous improvement projects. I didn't know the answers going into the projects, but I knew the team would have them. And, if you facilitate it properly, you get the communication started, everybody that was in the room was necessary. And these were, sometimes they were big worldwide projects. They weren't, smaller local, it could be any place. But I think that's probably the biggest thing. People are key, and the learning never stops. And your career's in your own hands. I jumped from, I came in to help implement SAP 4.0. That was back 2001. I did another implementation later before I left the company of ECC 6.0. And then in between that, I worked in quality, R&D, operations, and for a long time, I managed enterprise data quality. That was the SAP, side of the business.
Yep.
But that touches every function of the company. I worked with finance, legal, marketing, business development, operations, everybody. And that job didn't sound glamorous, but the amount of experience that gave me was absolutely tremendous.
Awesome. I love how you said it's all about constant learning, because you mentioned you had two things that made me think, I invest in myself every year with a new skill set that I want to learn. So I actually got my Six Sigma green belt. I'm not a black belt yet, but
congratulations.
I was really, I was fascinated by how to improve process. Even though I'm a managing director at an investment bank, even though I had a long career in commercial banking, there's a process to everything, right? Yeah. And how can you make it more efficient? So probably not at the same level that you've had, but I'm a big believer in Six Sigma. So
and that's key. Yeah,
it is.
That process, the process for everything. Yeah.
Process for everything, for sure. So, after spending 17 years, at what point did you say to yourself, like, okay, I'm ready to go out and build something on my own?
All right. So there's a little bit of story behind this.
Please.
So
I love stories.
As a mechanical engineer, my first, career love was automotive. I raced, I worked on cars, I built cars, designed them. And that my first endeavor allowed me to do that. I was financing my own racing career. When I went over to BD, now I had a family. We had this lawsuit going on with the infringers. So it was nose to the grindstone, 100% work and nothing else. When we finally, about 10 years in, we finally won some of these licensing agreements. They weren't lawsuits, but they could have been with these infringers. I had a little bit of extra cash. So I bought a 3D printing machine. And that was back in the Tony Stark days where, these things were in movies. They weren't really in everybody's, basement yet. And I started to build a prototype for an automotive transmission, an idea that I'd had since childhood, when my father told me it was impossible.
Of course.
That was the seed that he planted, So I had diligently kept an engineer's notebook about this. And one day I went to put another entry in the notebook, and it had tomorrow's date on my last entry. And I was baffled. I'm like, what is this? And I realized, it was last year. It was over a year that I had made a contribution to this. And it lit a fire in me to say, all right, I've lost my way with this project. And it's huge. It was it's a gear driven, continuously variable transmission. Story for another time, but it's like unobtainium. But I actually built it. It's, I've got it. I've got the prototype. So at that point, I built a really, minimal viable product.
Yep.
And started showing some friends. And one night they're all over here at dinner. And one of my neighbors says, I'm sick of hearing about this. I said, how much do you really need? And I said, well, it's about, 30 grand for a patent. And he said, well, put me down for one. And my other neighbor said, me too. And my other friend, me three. So just over dinner, without even asking, we had $90,000 to get started on this project.
Wow.
And my wife wasn't happy. Had a very nice career and future at BD. But that was the decision. That was the point where we said, all right, we're going to do something about this because it's the world needs it. It's a green technology thing. It's a performance thing. It was kind of the best of both worlds. So that's what launched me into starting the startup again. Ultimately, we raised about $265,000. And then in 2018, I left BD and started Geared Power.
Very cool.
Just to kind of finish up the story. That's where the name comes from, Geared Power. 2 years after that, COVID hit. And that's when we pivoted to solving the shortage of PPE. And we started winning awards. We said, we can't abandon the Geared Power name now. So we added Biotech to the end of it and spun it off. That's its own separate entity.
Very cool. Very cool. So you had a previous exit with innovative dynamics.
That's right.
How did how did that experience shape the way you're approaching, geared power now?
Well, I mentioned that BD really restoring my faith in business humanity. The end of geared power, or the end of innovative dynamics, that was a difficult time. It was irritable bowel syndrome. It was being, it was being violated. They partnered with us, reverse engineered what we were doing, and then developed their own product still under contract with us. So that was a difficult time. Most of, I guess, the biggest learning between innovative dynamics and now, our current venture is the business ecosystem. Back then, ownership was my primary goal. I wanted to keep that company that I was building. Yeah. And now I've got a better understanding of how, venture capital works. How you have to have an exit, and you could lose control, theoretically, mathematically, and still be in control, and or step away and still have everything that you built. It's still yours. Maybe you own 25% of it in the end instead of 90%. But that was probably the biggest learning is I didn't even realize how the capital markets worked. I was an engineer. I just wanted to build stuff. Now I'm a businessman and I've got a career's worth of experience,
I love it. So let's get into, you were working on the geared power, and I'm not going to try to, summarize what this does because I'm a banker, not an engineer. But then during COVID, everybody shifted. So, I mean, the story I always tell, I had just started at a new bank. My daughter was a couple months old and COVID hits. Yeah. And then all of a sudden, I think the bank at one time, I don't know if they want me to say this, but they allegedly said, we're only going to lend money to people that make hand sanitizer and rubber gloves or something like that. And I was like, well, that it's going to be kind of finding a needle in a haystack. And then we ended up doing a lot of PPP work and all that kind of stuff. But what was the point where you said, okay, there's a need for this? And then what made it kind of flip like that for you?
Well, I was happy working on the project I always wanted to work on. Yeah. But my data analytics within me, I was watching COVID before it was here in the US. And it was unbelievable. The parabolic shape of the curve never changed. The only thing that changed was the scale. The scale kept on coming down and bigger numbers, popped to the top. I had never seen that kind of response in the wild, so to speak, ever. So I knew this was really serious. It was unstoppable. And then when it hit here, there was the shortage of PPE, and that kind of aggravated me because other people knew about this. They prepared, and we got the short end of the stick. So I set out to just design a reusable mask. I've got it here.
Great.
I can show it to you, but it was intended just to be reusable. But now the method that we used to eliminate the filter material, took a very different approach. So this is an aerosol mask.
Yep.
And we've got some check valves on the inside.
Okay.
So you inhale through this oral port and you exhale through the nasal ports, they're called. And then it goes through the UV chambers on each side. And the concept is UVC kills everything. It's dangerous to human vision, to human skin, to all microbes. And the reason is the wavelength that is UVC doesn't make it through the atmosphere to Earth. So no microbes or viruses, pathogens, nothing has built a resistance to it. So the challenge for me was, as an engineer, as a scientist, can I design something that actually works, not just in concept, let's kill some viruses. And the key to making this work is not the UVC. UVC is not new technology. It's the volume of the chambers. It holds your previous breath in the chambers as you inhale your next breath. So you get static air in the chamber for half the duration of your breathing. The other half, it's traveling through. So you're still getting, a dose of UVC as it's moving through the chamber. But that static motion or a static, exposure is what really, puts us over the threshold. The average dose of UVC that's required to kill COVID, for example, is 1.2 millijoules per square centimeter.
Okay.
And just 1.2, right? So we're applying over 10 times that amount. We work with the FDA. We got into the Safer Technologies program, and that's they've done what accounts to a summary of a design review. Validation is in the lab. We have actual evidence, but they've done a design review. They've looked at the numbers. They looked at all of my work, and came to the conclusion that there's a reasonable expectation of clinical success. So that was a huge win for us to be scrutinized by the one of the most valued scrutinizers on earth, the FDA, right? So we're really proud of that. We have a couple of challenges ahead of us. I don't want to get too far in front of it, our discussions, but that was the impetus, was just to create a reusable mask. And now we have something that is actually able to kill. It's not just for COVID. I designed it during COVID, but it's pathogen agnostic. So it'll work with tuberculosis, measles, the common cold, flu. And as you mentioned in the intro.
Would you be able to, like, I'm just trying to think for like the lay person here, the non-engineer, non-medical person. Sure. You're in the hospital with tuberculosis or COVID or one of these airborne diseases where you're expelling your breath could get other people sick. You would then be able to wear this mask, be able to get maybe oxygen coming in.
Right.
And then whatever you're breathing out, it's going to be able to protect everyone else that's around you trying to treat you.
Perfect summary. Absolutely right. And some of the doctors I've spoken with, they gave some examples. One doctor mentioned sometimes when the emergency department's full and you have a patient that requires nebulization.
Yeah.
They can't provide that medical treatment because the nebulizer aerosolizes potential pathogens. So they may need nebulization because they're asthmatic, but they may also have the flu. So they can't provide them with their nebulization. With our device, they can. The nebulizer connects to the oxygen port, the oral port, and everything that they exhale is neutralized.
It's amazing.
Non-viable. So yeah, he got pretty excited about it. And I think rightfully so. We designed it, or I designed it during COVID. And as the data and understanding of UVC and things like COVID got better, the product didn't change, but it got better.
Yeah.
Because the required dose came down over time.
Yeah. So
you understood more.
For sure. So, I mean, you have all these patents, you have all these awards, you have FDA momentum, you have congressional support. You were also still pre-revenue though, and waiting for clearing.
It's crazy.
How are you managing that right now? I mean, it's like you have the wins are behind the sales, like we're ready to go. How do you manage that gap?
It's amazing. It helps, being an entrepreneur, it's not all glamorous.
Yes.
Right. And sometimes you have difficult, conversations at home about finances, and all this success really helped those difficult conversations. We're all on board. We have to bring this to market, no matter how difficult times get. And we're in no way in dire straits, but it's still expensive. We have over $750,000 into us personally, on top of the investors. So all of that tailwind, that really helps us, obviously in the public eye, as well as, what we're doing internally as well, paddling like a duck underwater. Right.
Yeah. Are you looking for more support in that? I mean, and who would be like kind of the ideal person if you are?
Yeah, we are. We're, some of the challenges I've got this right here. So, as an entrepreneur, you got to get a little, crafty sometimes. That's a $20,000 ventilator.
Yeah.
So I got it. I got a really good deal on it. I didn't spend that much on it, but we need to test our product. Now, normally masks are tested for airflow and for particle reduction. N95 is 95% of reduction, a reduced number of particles that pass through that filter material. We don't use filters. We're using UVC as the mechanism of action. So the standard tests don't apply. The FDA is working with, as part of the Safer Technologies program, is they work with us. They become a collaborator to help put together a protocol that we can use to test this in the lab. Now we have to use live pathogens and then demonstrate that the UVC passing through the device, inactivates all those pathogens. So that's expensive. Unfortunately, it's a little more expensive than a drop test and a, biocompatible, compatibility test. But so that's our first milestone. And then, of course, the FDA also requires its testing to be done on your production lot.
Okay.
Right. So, this is an injection molded item. The molds are expensive. So, we're looking for, $1 million for manufacturing, a couple 100,000, 300,000 for testing, and then launch as well. It's launching into the healthcare sector is not, it's not like just putting your product on Amazon. So there's some heavy lifting ahead of us.
Yeah.
But it's conventional business in the sector. And these are all things that we can accomplish. We just need a little bit of operating capital to get there. So you mentioned who's that perfect investor?
Yeah.
Somebody that's in the space, med tech, medical device. So expectations are aligned. We know now. Yeah, I'm gonna give the FDA some kudos here. We applied for breakthrough device designation, and they worked with us to find a faster way to commercialization. They actually recommended and invited us to apply for the Safer Technologies program. The Safer Technologies program requires us to demonstrate that we're safer or more effective than the current standard of care.
Okay.
So this lab test that we have to do, it's probably a BSL-2 or BSL-3 lab test. That's our last step in our regulatory process before commercialization. There's no clinical trial required. If we had gone breakthrough device designation, it would have been people-centric instead of product-centric, and we would have had to, conduct clinical trials. So we're very close to commercialization. I think if you look at other investment opportunities that are out there, we're pretty much on top of the list because we're so close.
Yeah.
And we don't need a lot to get over the hump.
For sure.
But commercialization, that's still in healthcare rather, it's expensive. So we're looking for 3 million in the US, 3 million in Europe, and 10 million to go worldwide. Depends on who the partner is, who wants to come in for, do you want to do it, sequentially? Most investors want their money quicker. So we put a little more upfront. We can do Europe parallel with our US efforts and get the commercialization worldwide that much faster.
Very cool. Well, I will after this call be happy to connect some dots for you to people
awesome.
within my network. So you briefly touched on this before, just kind of like one of those things, like I do with I played in a rock band back in the day.
Yeah,
let's get into
awesome.
Gary. Let's get into Gary personally here. I mean, you're a former Skip Barber Pro Series driver. You sound like a badass. Let's talk about this a little bit here. And a world record lap holder in New Hampshire. So get into this for me.
Yeah, it was, as I mentioned, that was my first, professional love. It was automotive, and I had some hot rods when I was younger. Built some cars, and how do you bridge this to real racing? And then I found out about Skip Barber Racing School. Well, that sounds like a good entry point.
Yeah, for sure.
And it's expensive, but it's basically for what you're getting. It's a very good value. You arrive and you drive. Back when I was a little bit younger, they had an IROC series. They would pick the best drivers from all different types of racing, drag racing, IndyCar racing, NASCAR, and they'd all race together in the International Race of Champions, IROC. And it was an arrive and drive series. Yeah. Those guys didn't prepare the cars. The series did. And the best driver won. And that's what the Skip Barber series is like. Mm-hmm. And so I did that for 2 years. The first year I did 1 or 2 races. It was very expensive, but I did pretty well. The second year I really started kicking butt. I was still on a budget, and I got a little bit of a reputation. I'd skip practice because you got a reduced bill. Yeah. Some people show up 3 days early to practice and build up. So I'd skip practice, go right to the first race and then win, or do really well. I've got a, closet full of trophies, but the engineering the athletics. I used to wrestle and pole vault, so all of that came together with something that I loved, driving.
Mm-hmm.
And that was really something I was great at. And then I went on I was actually a crew chief and a chief engineer for a professional team in Trans Am, SCCA Pro Racing. It was wonderful. It was wonderful. Yeah. And, I could tell you all kinds of stories about drifting at 120 miles an hour through the New Hampshire Oval, but, that's, I don't know. It feels like,
what, though? I truly believe though that it humanizes you, and like these stories like that, I think it's like it's a great human connection that you can have with somebody. So I have to ask, are you still, does the family still allow you to drive cars? And
well, I don't drive professionally anymore.
I'm talking about what's in the garage right now. Are we, do we get a little fast every once in a while? What's like,
yeah. I think the best thing people, if people want to learn how to drive better, learn how to brake better. It's amazing how quickly you can stop a car.
Yeah. Yeah.
People panic. They slam on the brakes. This is where anti-locking brakes really help out.
Yeah.
Anti-locking brakes will stop you from losing control of the car if you hit the brakes too hard. But anti-locking brakes can't compete with a trained race car driver and how quickly they can stop the car.
Yeah.
There's a feel for it. And to be able to do that, panic stop, but not be panicking, be in control, be able to steer around something even while you're braking. It could help other people. You don't have to drive fast, just be a better driver.
I love it.
I don't want to talk about how I drive on the road.
No, that's all good. So, is there, what do you think? Is there any tie-ins or any lessons learned from racing that you've taken into business?
Absolutely. They're so aligned. It's at every step there's an analogy. Most people think racing is about taking chances and being risky. And it's absolutely the opposite. There is so much safety that goes into those cars. And, as I mentioned, drifting around, 120 miles an hour, you don't just go out there and see if you can do 120 miles an hour around a corner. You creep up on that every lap after lap, and you get better and better and better. And all of a sudden you hear the wheel squealing. It's like, oh, that's fine. I know where I'm at. I'm not at the limit yet.
Yeah.
So, everything's calculated. Racing is like a chess match at speed. You get past, now you got to calculate where's the next place I can repass, and how many, the last race I won, the last race I competed in, I won. It was at Watkins Glen, and I was leading most of the race, but last lap I got passed because the guy that passed was calculating where can I pass him. So at the end of the straightaway, just before the bus stop, right, and then coming through the boot, I got him, and it took 3 turns to get past him. It's difficult. The chess match. It's very, very exciting. I can tell you all kinds of stories. That's obviously something I'm still passionate about.
For sure. So, you describe yourself as a single founder, and, a lot of people might see that as like a risk, but you kind of wear it as like a badge of honor and a part of your story. Why is that?
Well, that's how we started. And right now we have a team of 5, right? We're still looking for funding. So every one of those individuals besides me, including me, we're not getting paid. We're not drawing a salary. Yeah. Now I have them on safe agreements. We have working agreements. They will get compensated. And I intend on compensating them handsomely for helping.
For sure.
But I joke. I said this at the EY reception. That I've had this face for 60 years. I've never been this popular. Said it's not me. It's the product. And people get excited about the product. They see the potential. We all lived through COVID. We know how that particular virus spread and how easy it was for it to spread and how devastating it was. So, and nobody's wearing this in public anymore, right? I would never want to see that. But in hospitals, the statistics are really they're staggering.
Yeah.
If you get on a plane, you have a 1 in 200, 1 in 11 million. I'm sorry, 1 in 11 million chance of being in a fatal accident on a commercial airline. Go into a hospital, it's 1 in 250. 3 digits, 1 in 250 of dying from an infection you acquired in the hospital. It's staggering. And the number one cause of hospital-acquired infections in the emergency department is respiratory infections. So that's the market's there.
Yeah.
I know sometimes we talk about, on your podcast, you talk about books, what are the nice books? One of my favorite authors was Geoffrey Moore, right? Crossing the Chasm. And I've worked on some difficult projects in the past. And to get that knowledge and background, get people behind you, is such a heavy lift. With BioGuard UVC, everybody understands it. And that, I believe that's why we're winning these awards, because even though we're pre-revenue, we're not using any new technology. UVC, an aerosol mask. I didn't show you this, but it's a USB battery pack. All common stuff. And that's the way I designed it. I didn't want to cannibalize some other market. I wanted to create something that could stand on its own and help. So when people see it now, it's kind of quickly understood. And that's a wonderful place to be, because like you said, all these awards, it's really, it's mind boggling that we're doing this with, without having sold a single item yet. And once we get through the FDA, that's going to change quickly.
I can imagine. I'm from your lips to God's ears, my friend. So I would be remiss if we didn't take an opportunity to kind of shout out some of the great New Jersey business organizations that have helped support you, Gary. So I'll give you the floor here. Absolutely.
Thank you. Yeah. Obviously, the most recent one is EY and the Entrepreneur of the Year program. That was a wonderful experience. And just for everyone else that's out there, if you're a startup, the EY's got a program for you. So take a look at it. Don't self-exclude yourself. NJMEP, the New Jersey Manufacturing Extension Program. Wonderful people over there. New Jersey Business and Industry Association. Great, both of them. It was a collaborative effort that they awarded us the coolest thing made in New Jersey in 2025. And then we have the Healthcare Institute in New Jersey and BioNJ. The people at BioNJ are just unbelievable. That's a great organization. If you're in med tech or health tech, obviously bio, pharma, that's the organization for you. They're great individuals, great people. NJBAC, the Business Action Center, the Commission on Science and Technology, and then NJEDA. There's New Jersey, they promote all of these statistics. New Jersey has the highest density of engineers and scientists any place in the United States. So the ecosystem.
You can't knock New Jersey. You can't knock New Jersey.
Yeah, it is really, they're there to help. And as you had mentioned earlier, you go to these meetings and you're not there for a specific reason. You're there to meet people. And I've helped other people. And and it goes both ways. So, it's a great ecosystem. You get, I call it getting out of the garage. Every time I go with as many of these events that they're happening, I'm there, because you never know who you're going to meet. And I've met some wonderful people.
Absolutely.
And those organizations are helping you build what we're building. I appreciate that. And thanks for allowing me to mention
no
them.
problem. We definitely need to do that. So I have my $1 million question I like to ask all of my guests. When you look back on your journey, both personally and professionally, was there one moment that at the time felt really, really small, but ended up changing everything for you?
Well, on a professional level, pivoting to the reusable mask, which turned into BioGuard, that really just seemed like a benevolent thing on my part. I've got medical device experience. Let me see if I can come up with something. I really didn't think it was going to be bigger than the automotive, the first purpose of our organization. So perhaps in that regard, that's one up there high on the list. Personally, I gotta mention my wife, Tanya. She warned me, said, if you really want to do this again, You know what it did, with innovative dynamics, how that ended. It's so terrible. You want to put yourself through all of that. And at the time, my kids were in high school. Now my oldest, my son, we call him GK. He's Gary the third. He got married to Olivia. I got my daughter Tiffany. She's getting married to Jared, and my daughter Trisha and her boyfriend Ish. They're still in school, still at college.
Yeah.
And she managed all of that financially.
Wow.
That's a heavy burden.
And that's
at the time I said, we'll be rolling in the money, and it's not about the money for us, bringing this needs to get out to the public, it needs to be out to the patients. But that seemed like an insignificant decision. My wife knew better, but in the end, we're all in agreement. We're doing the right thing.
Very cool, my friend. So listen, where can people, obviously we'll have everything in the show notes, but how can people get in touch with you, whether they, want to learn more about the product, they want to support you, they want to potentially invest? What's the best way for people to reach out to you, Gary?
Thanks. My email's gary@gearedpower.com. Our website is gp-bio.com. A little different there. We spun off. And then my LinkedIn, I'm very active on LinkedIn.
Very good.
So, and it's just Gary Kellstrom on LinkedIn.
Awesome. Well, Gary, thank you so much for joining me and going beyond the deal with me. And for those listening, if you're a founder, business owner, investor, or advisor trying to think through what the next stage of growth looks like, whether that's capital, strategy, or a potential exit, or simply understanding what relationships you need around the table, that's exactly the kind of conversations that I have every day. The truth is, the right decision at the right time can change the entire trajectory of the business. So if you want a second perspective or just someone to think it through with, please feel free to reach out. I'm always happy to have a conversation. And if you found this episode valuable, please subscribe to the podcast and share it with someone in your network who could benefit from it. Let's continue to build something meaningful together. Gary, thank you so much.
Michael, thank you so much. It's really been a pleasure. Thank you.